The Adebayo household was a whirlwind of chaos that morning, as it often was on weekdays. Yuande, the matriarch, juggled frying plantains on one burner while her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications about a presentation she was running late for. Her husband, Kunle, muttered under his breath, trying to locate his car keys amidst the mess on the living room table. Tunde, their 7-year-old, sat quietly in his school uniform, swinging his legs off the edge of the couch, the only calm in the storm. Kunle, I'm not dropping Tunde today. You know I have that big client meeting, Yuande said, exasperated, as she handed him a thermos of coffee. Kunle sighed, already halfway out the door. Fine. I'll take him, he said dismissively. Tunde, get your bag and come on. We're late. As the front door slammed shut behind them, Yuande exhaled deeply and returned to her tasks. She assumed Kunli would handle the school drop-off and focus on her own mounting responsibilities. Neither of them noticed the lingering unease in Tunde's eyes as he climbed into the car. At school, Tunde hesitated as he stepped out. Daddy, are you picking me up later? He asked softly, clutching his bag straps. Kunli, distracted by a phone call, waved him off. Your mom will handle it, he said hurriedly before driving away. Neither parent noticed the seed of neglect they had inadvertently sown. Hours slipped by in the bustling city of Lagos. Yuande, buried in her spreadsheets and presentations, barely had time to glance at her phone. Kunle, deep in negotiations with a stubborn client, was equally oblivious. By late afternoon, both assumed the other had picked Tunde up from school. Tunde, meanwhile, waited on a wooden bench near the school gate. One by one, his classmates were picked up by parents or guardians until he was the only child left. The sky began to shift from bright blue to muted orange as twilight approached. They'll come, he told himself, though doubt crept into his voice. A security guard noticed him sitting alone and approached. Young man, who is coming to get you? The guard asked. My mummy or daddy? Tunde replied, though his voice trembled. The guard nodded, but seemed unconvinced. As the minutes turned to hours, the guard eventually locked up the gate, leaving Tunde on the curb, alone. Yuande arrived home first, her heels clicking against the tiled floor as she entered the quiet house. Tunde, are you home? She called out, expecting the usual chatter of her son. Silence. She frowned, pulling out her phone to call Kunle. Did you pick up Tunde? Kunle's confusion was palpable. What are you talking about? You were supposed to get him. Panic set in immediately. Kunle, how could you leave him there? She shouted, her voice breaking. She grabbed her car keys and bolted out the door, Kunle following closely behind. The school was deserted when they arrived. The guard, who was about to leave for the night, shook his head when they asked about Tunde. He waited a long time, madam. I thought someone would come, but when no one did, he walked off, said he'd find his way home. Yuande felt her knees buckle. Kunle's face turned ashen. Their worst nightmare was beginning to unfold. The streets of Lagos were an endless maze of headlights, voices, and shadows as night fell. Tunde wandered cautiously, clutching his small schoolbag tightly. Each step felt heavier as the realization dawned that he had no idea how to get home. Every alley looked the same, and every corner seemed darker than the last. He passed a group of young men gathered around a makeshift stall, their loud laughter unsettling him. He quickened his pace, avoiding eye contact, but his small figure did not go unnoticed. Hey, little boy, what are you doing out here alone? One of the men called out, stepping closer. Tunde froze, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. I'm going home, he stammered, edging away. The man's smile faded into a frown. This is no place for you at night. Where are your parents? Before Tunde could respond, another man waved him off. Leave the boy alone, let him go. Taking the opportunity, Tunde bolted, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could. He didn't stop until he reached a quieter street. Panting and exhausted, he slumped against a wall, tears streaming down his face. Meanwhile, Yuande and Kunle drove frantically through the city, calling out Tunde's name at every turn. Yuande's hands trembled as she dialed the police. Our son is missing, she said, her voice cracking. He's just 7 years old. The officer's response was calm but not comforting. We'll dispatch officers to search the area, ma'am. Please stay by your phone. Kunle gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. We'll find him, he said firmly, though the fear in his eyes betrayed him. Tunde's small figure, lost amidst the sprawling city, was now a needle in a haystack. Every second felt like an eternity as the night deepened. Tunde's sobs eventually subsided into quiet sniffles as he sat against the wall, clutching his school bag tightly. He was cold, hungry, and scared. The faint sound of a generator hummed nearby, mingling with the occasional blare of car horns in the distance. Just when he felt completely invisible, a warm voice broke through his despair. "Little boy, what are you doing here all alone?" Tunde looked up to see an older woman, her face kind but weathered, standing before him. She carried a tray balanced on her head, laden with roasted corn and ground nuts. Her eyes softened as she took in his tear-streaked face. "I don't know how to go home," Tunde admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman knelt beside him, setting her tray down. "Where are your parents?" she asked gently. "I don't know," he replied, his bottom lip trembling. "They didn't come for me at school." The woman sighed deeply, shaking her head. "It's not safe for you to be out here like this. Come, let me give you something to eat, then we'll figure out how to help you." Tunde hesitated, but the sight of the roasted corn made his empty stomach ache. Slowly, he nodded. The woman handed him a cob of corn and watched as he ate ravenously. "What's your name?" she asked. "Tunde," he said between bites. "Tunde, my name is Mama Bola. Don't worry. We'll get you home," she assured him. Meanwhile, Yuande and Kunle were growing increasingly desperate. They had scoured every street around the school and called every relative they could think of, all to no avail. As the hours stretched on, their guilt and fear deepened. Back on the quiet street, Mama Bola led Tunde to her small roadside stall. "Stay here with me. I'll call someone who can help," she said, pulling out a battered phone. For the first time that night, Tunde felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. The Lagos night was alive with the sound of car horns, distant sirens, and the hum of a city that never truly slept. Mama Bola's roadside stall provided a small sanctuary amidst the chaos. Tunde sat on a wooden stool, nibbling on another piece of roasted corn as Mama Bola dialed numbers on her phone. Her brow furrowed with concern as she spoke to someone on the other end. "Yes, the boy is here with me," she explained. "He says his name is Tunde. He doesn't know his parents' phone numbers or their address. I'm afraid to leave him alone to search." The voice on the other end, belonging to a local community leader, reassured her that they would contact the authorities. "Just keep him safe, Mama Bola. We'll try to help locate his parents." Tunde's eyelids were heavy with exhaustion, but fear kept him alert. He clutched his school bag tightly, his small face peering into the darkness around them. Every passing shadow made him flinch, a reminder of the unknown dangers lurking in the city. Meanwhile, Yewande and Kunle, their nerves frayed, arrived at the nearest police station to report Tunde missing. The officers on duty were professional but overburdened, the weight of the city's chaos evident in their weary expressions. "Do you have a recent photo of your son?" one officer asked. Yewande fumbled through her phone, her hands shaking, until she found a picture of Tunde smiling brightly on his birthday. The officer nodded. "We'll distribute this image and inform our patrol teams. But Lagos is a big city. It might take time." Kunle slammed his fist against the counter, his voice trembling with desperation. "He's just a child. Anything could happen to him out there." The officer remained calm. "We understand, sir. But it's important you remain composed. We'll do everything we can." Yewande sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "This is all my fault," she whispered. Kunle placed a hand on her shoulder, but didn't speak. The guilt was shared, unspoken yet overwhelming. Back at the stall, Mama Bola wrapped a shawl around Tunde as the night air grew colder. "You're a brave boy, Tunde," she said softly. "Your parents must be worried sick about you." Tunde looked up at her, his eyes glistening with tears. "Do you think they'll find me?" She nodded firmly. "They will. And until they do, I'll make sure you're safe." The city felt vast and unyielding, a maze of uncertainty and danger. Yet in the midst of it all, a small corner of compassion had emerged. Tunde, though still lost, began to feel a glimmer of hope in the kindness of a stranger. As the hours dragged on, the search for Tunde intensified, and the weight of the city's indifference was countered by the humanity of those who cared. But time was running out, and the night was far from over. Mama Bola sat beside Tunde as the cold night deepened, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her phone buzzed intermittently, as she made call after call. Her patience was unwavering as she explained Tunde's plight to local contacts who might help. Finally, she reached someone with a connection to a neighborhood watch group. I beg, help me, she pleaded, her voice carrying both urgency and determination. This boy needs to find his parents. I can't leave him here alone. The man on the other end promised to dispatch someone to assist. Stay put, Mama Bola. We'll spread the word. Tunde, still clutching his school bag, sat quietly beside her. He stared out into the dimly lit street, every sound amplifying his fears. His thoughts drifted to his parents. Did they even realize he was missing? The ache in his chest rivaled the hunger in his stomach. Meanwhile, Yuande and Kunle had enlisted every possible resource to find their son. The police, though cooperative, had limited manpower to dedicate to the search. Kunle's frustration boiled over as he paced in front of the station. This isn't enough, he shouted at the officer on duty. My son is out there, and you're telling me to wait? The officer remained calm but firm. We've notified patrols in the area. Lagos is vast, sir. This will take time. Yuande, drained of energy and hope, whispered, what if something happens to him? Kunle, I can't bear it. Kunle turned to her, his face a mixture of guilt and determination. We won't stop, we'll keep looking. Back at the stall, two men from the neighborhood watch arrived on motorbikes. They greeted Mama Bola and crouched down to Tunde's level. Little one, can you remember anything about your house? One of them asked gently. Tunde shook his head. I don't know the name of the street, but there's a big mango tree near our gate. The men exchanged glances. It's not much, but it's a start. Let's take him to the community center. We can coordinate better from there, one of them suggested. Mama Bola hesitated. Are you sure he'll be safe with you? The man nodded. We'll look after him like he's our own. Tunde looked up at her, his eyes pleading. Will you come with me? He asked softly. Her heart melted. Of course, I'll come. As they prepared to leave, a patrol car slowed down nearby. The officers inside had been alerted by the neighborhood watch. They stepped out and listened as Mama Bola explained the situation. We'll escort you to the community center, one officer said. It's safer to travel together. For the first time since nightfall, a coordinated effort began to emerge. Tunde sat between Mama Bola and one of the watchmen on the motorbike as the small convoy moved through the city. Though still lost, Tunde felt a tiny glimmer of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, the night would bring him home. The convoy of motorbikes and the patrol car moved steadily through the sprawling streets of Lagos, with Mama Bola sitting close to Tunde on one of the bikes. He clutched her arm tightly, the vibrations of the motorbike unfamiliar but oddly comforting compared to the terror he had experienced earlier. Tunde, you're safe with us, Mama Bola reassured him, her voice firm and motherly. We'll take you somewhere where people will help find your parents. The group reached the local community center, a modest building lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb. It was buzzing with activity, as members of the neighborhood watch and a few local residents had already gathered, alerted by the calls Mama Bola had made. Tunde looked around, his small frame trembling but slightly less tense, as he saw concerned faces instead of the indifferent ones he had encountered earlier. Inside, one of the officers gently questioned Tunde. Can you remember anything else about your house? Maybe a street name? A landmark? Tunde shook his head, his voice barely audible. There's a mango tree, and a big red gate. The officer sighed but remained patient. That's good, Tunde. It helps. We'll do our best to find it. Mama Bola chimed in. We need to keep him here, safe, while we spread the word further. I've already spoken to a few people who might know where his parents live. Across town, Kunle and Yewande were in a state of near hysteria. They had driven aimlessly for hours, stopping at every major intersection and busy area to ask passersby if they had seen a young boy in a school uniform. Most shook their heads, some didn't bother to answer, and a few offered vague directions that led to dead ends. Yuande's phone buzzed, startling her. It was a call from one of Kunle's cousins. We've heard from a friend in the neighborhood watch. They might have found a boy who matches Tunde's description. He's at a community center near Surulere. Kunle grabbed the phone. Are you sure? Is it really him? They're not certain, but it's worth checking out, the cousin replied. Without a moment's hesitation, Kunle swerved the car towards Surelaire, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. Yuande whispered prayers under her breath, clutching Tunde's picture tightly in her hand. At the community center, Tunde sat on a bench next to Mama Bola, who was rubbing his back gently. Despite her comforting presence, his eyelids drooped with exhaustion. A warm plate of jollof rice and fried fish sat in front of him, but he had eaten only a few bites. You need to eat, my dear, Mama Bola urged. I'm not hungry, Tunde mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. The officers and community members were busy discussing plans when the sound of screeching tires outside drew everyone's attention. Moments later, Kunle and Yuande burst into the room, their faces pale and drawn with worry. Tunde! Yuande cried out, her voice cracking. Tunde looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Mummy! Daddy! He screamed, jumping off the bench and running into their arms. The room fell silent as the family clung to each other, their tears flowing freely. Kunle knelt down, holding his son tightly. I'm so sorry, Tunde. We'll never let this happen again, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Mama Bola wiped her own tears as she watched the reunion. Thank God, she murmured. As Iwande and Kunle thanked everyone profusely, promising to repay their kindness, Tunde finally felt the safety and warmth he had been longing for all night. The nightmare was over, but its lessons would stay with them forever. Still, the city watched on, knowing that such stories didn't always end with joy. Inside the community center, emotions were running high. Tunde, now reunited with his parents, clung tightly to his mother's side, his small body trembling as if he feared being lost again. Kunle's hand rested protectively on his son's shoulder, though his expression was one of guilt and weariness. I'm so sorry, Tunde, Yuande whispered, stroking his hair. We should never have let this happen. It's our fault. The community members who had helped bring Tunde to safety stood silently, their faces a mixture of relief and subdued anger. Mama Bola, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, finally spoke up. This could have ended differently, she said, her voice firm. You're lucky your boy found his way to someone who cared. Lagos isn't kind to children wandering alone at night. Iwande nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're right. We failed him. Kunle stepped forward. I don't know how to thank all of you, especially you, Mama Bola. You've done for us what we should have done ourselves. The older woman waved off his gratitude, though her voice softened. Just promise me you'll never let him slip through the cracks again. Children deserve more than just love. They need attention and protection. The events of the night had a ripple effect. Yuande and Kunle, shaken to their core, vowed to restructure their lives. The following morning, Kunle called an emergency family meeting. We need to make changes, he began, his tone somber. Our schedules are too chaotic. We've been prioritizing work over family, and last night could have cost us everything. Yuande nodded in agreement. I've been thinking the same thing. We can hire someone to help with school runs, or I can adjust my hours at work. Tunde, sitting between his parents, looked up at them with wide, tired eyes. Will we have more time together now? Kunle bent down to his level. Yes, son. You'll never feel forgotten again. That's a promise. Back in her small home, Mama Bola reflected on the events of the night. Her humble stall had seen countless faces over the years, but Tunde's would stay with her forever. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing she had played a part in reuniting the boy with his family. As she prepared her tray of roasted corn for another day's work, she offered a prayer for Tunde and all the other children in the city who might not be so fortunate. The streets of Lagos held countless stories, some ending in hope, others in despair. But for now, one family had found their way back together, and that was enough to bring a small smile to her face. As the Adebayo family began their journey of healing, they also committed to a deeper involvement in their community. Inspired by Mama Bola's kindness and the efforts of the Neighborhood Watch, they began volunteering their time and resources to help protect other vulnerable children. The memory of that harrowing night would never fade, but it served as a constant reminder of what truly mattered: family, vigilance, and the unwavering bond of love. The Adebayo home was unusually quiet in the days following Tunde's return. The once bustling house, filled with hurried conversations and the clatter of daily life, now carried an air of introspection. Kunle and Yuande avoided looking each other in the eyes for too long, each grappling with their guilt in their own way. Tunde, still recovering from the trauma of his ordeal, stayed close to his parents. At night, he refused to sleep in his room alone, opting instead to curl up between them. The nightmares came frequently, images of dark streets and shadowy figures haunting his dreams. One morning, Yuande sat at the dining table with a cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the rising sun. Kunle joined her, his steps hesitant. "We need to talk," he said quietly. She nodded, not looking up. "We do." Kunle pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I've been thinking about what happened, about how we let things get so out of control. We're always so busy, too busy to even check on our son." Yuande sighed, her voice heavy with regret. "I keep replaying that day in my mind. How could I have been so careless? I thought you had him. I assumed." "We both assumed," Kunle admitted. "But assumptions don't raise children. Actions do." They sat in silence for a moment before Yuande spoke again. "I've decided to cut back my hours at work. I'll make sure I'm the one to pick Tunde up from school every day no matter what." Kunle looked surprised. "Are you sure? Your job means so much to you." "Not as much as my family," she said firmly. "We came so close to losing him, Kunle. I can't take that risk again." Kunle nodded, his face set with determination. "Then I'll do my part too. No more late night meetings unless absolutely necessary, and I'll make sure we have more family time, even if it means saying no to clients." Meanwhile, Tunde finds his voice. At school, Tunde struggled to regain his confidence. His classmates asked questions about why he had been absent, their curious gazes making him feel exposed. The teachers, while kind, treated him with a cautious gentleness that only made him feel more out of place. During lunch, Tunde sat alone at a bench, picking at his food. A boy from his class, Emeka, approached him with a sheepish grin. "Hey Tunde," Emeka said, sitting down beside him. "We missed you, are you okay?" Tunde hesitated, then nodded. "I'm okay." "My mum said something happened to you," Emeka continued, his tone curious but not unkind. "That you got lost in the city." Tunde's grip tightened on his lunchbox. He didn't want to relive it, but he also didn't want to feel like a victim. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I was lost, but I found my way back." Emeka nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. "You're brave. I'd be so scared if that happened to me." Tunde managed a small smile. "I was scared, but some people helped me." For the first time since his ordeal, Tunde felt a flicker of pride. He had faced something terrifying and come out stronger. Taking action as a family one evening, Kunle returned home with a stack of flyers in his hand. "We're putting these up around the neighborhood," he announced. Yuande took one and read it aloud. "Protect Our Kids, a community watch initiative." Kunle nodded. "I spoke to the neighborhood association. They're on board to create a network of parents, shop owners, and residents who can keep an eye out for children who might be in trouble." Yuande's eyes lit up. "This is a wonderful idea, Kunle." Tunde, who had been coloring at the table, looked up. "Can I help?" Kunle smiled and ruffled his son's hair. "Of course you can. This is about keeping all kids safe, including you." Together, the Adebayo family walked through their neighborhood, distributing the flyers and talking to their neighbors. The experience brought them closer, reminding them of the importance of community and shared responsibility. Though the scars of that fateful night remained, they were beginning to heal, replaced by a newfound strength and determination. For the first time in a long while, the Adebayo family felt whole. But the story wasn't over yet. The city of Lagos still had its challenges, and the Adebayo family was about to face another test, one that would push their newfound resolve to its limits. It had been 2 weeks since Tunde's disappearance and safe return. The Adebayo family was slowly settling into their new routine. Yuande had adjusted her work hours to ensure she was always available for school pickups, and Kunle made good on his promise to prioritize family time. Tunde seemed happier and more confident, though he still carried a faint wariness that hadn't been there before. One Friday evening, as the family sat together in the living room, enjoying a quiet dinner, Kunle's phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "It's work," he muttered, standing to answer. Yuande's eyes followed him, her brow furrowing. Kunle had been better about setting boundaries, but work crises still crept in. She sighed and turned her attention back to Tunde, who was describing a new game he had played at school. Kunle returned a few minutes later, his expression troubled. That was the office. They need me to come in tonight. There's an urgent issue with a client. Yuande's face hardened. Kunle, we agreed. Family comes first. I know, he said, raising his hands defensively. But this is different. It's not something I can push off. The tension in the room was palpable. Tunde, sensing the shift in mood, looked down at his plate, his appetite suddenly gone. Yuande's voice was quiet but firm. If you go tonight, what message does that send to us? To Tunde? Kunle hesitated, the weight of the decision clear on his face. Finally, he exhaled and shook his head. You're right. I'll call them back and tell them I can't make it. Yuande softened, reaching out to squeeze his hand. Thank you, Kunle. This is how we show Tunde and ourselves that things are different now. Tunde looked up, a small smile playing on his lips. For the first time, he felt truly seen and valued. Later that night, as the family prepared for bed, a loud knock echoed through the house. Kunle, startled, hurried to the door. On the other side stood their neighbor, Mr. Ibrahim, his face pale and frantic. Kunle, please, I need your help. My daughter, Amina, hasn't come home from her friend's house. She's not answering her phone, and I'm worried something's happened. Kunle felt a chill run down his spine. Memories of Tunde's ordeal came flooding back. Where did she say she was going? Yuande asked, joining them at the door. She went to her friend's place down the street after school. She was supposed to be back hours ago, Mr. Ibrahim explained, his voice shaking. Without hesitation, Kunle grabbed his keys. We'll help you look for her, he said. Tunde, standing in the hallway, clutched his mother's hand tightly. Will she be okay? He whispered. Yuande knelt to his level and held his face gently. We'll do everything we can to find her, just like we found you, she promised. Kunle, Yuande, and Mr. Ibrahim drove through the streets of the neighborhood, calling out Amina's name and stopping to ask passersby if they had seen her. Meanwhile, Yuande sent messages to the newly formed community watch group, rallying them to assist in the search. Within an hour, a small crowd had gathered, flashlights in hand, scouring the area. Mama Bola was among them, her ever-present tray of roasted corn set aside. We'll find her, she said firmly. This community takes care of its own. The group split into teams, covering different parts of the neighborhood. Yuande and Kunle searched near Amina's school, while others checked the local market and nearby alleys. As the clock ticked past midnight, the tension grew unbearable. Mr. Bell, Ibrahim was visibly distraught, pacing and muttering prayers under his breath. Finally, a shout broke through the night. We found her. The group rushed toward the voice. Amina was sitting on the steps of a closed shop, her eyes red from crying. She had gotten lost after taking a wrong turn on her way home and had been too afraid to ask for help. Mr. Ibrahim fell to his knees, pulling his daughter into a tight embrace. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, Thank God you're safe. Yuande and Kunle exchanged a relieved glance. The community had come together once again to protect one of its own. As the group dispersed, Kunle placed a hand on Mr. Ibrahim's shoulder. This is why we need each other, he said. No parent can do it alone. That night, as the Adebayo family returned home, Tunde hugged his parents tightly. I'm glad we helped, he said softly. So are we, Tunde, Yuande replied, kissing his forehead. So are we. The events of the night weighed heavily on the Adebayo family as they prepared for the new day. Though Amina had been found safe, the emotional toll was a stark reminder of how fragile safety could be in a bustling city like Lagos. Tunde, unusually quiet at breakfast, seemed to be lost in thought. Tunde, are you okay? Yuande asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. He nodded slowly, then looked up. What if Amina wasn't found? What if she got hurt, like I almost did? Yuande crouched beside him, her voice calm but firm. That's why we don't stop looking, Tunde. When someone is lost, we keep trying until we find them. That's what family, neighbors, and community do. And that's why you always have to trust the people who care for you. Kunle added, and it's also why we have to learn from these moments. We can't let ourselves get so busy that we forget what really matters. Later that day, as Yuande dropped Tunde off at school, she noticed a group of parents gathered near the gate. The headmistress, Mrs. Ogunlana, stood at the center, her usual stern expression softened by a sense of purpose. Mrs. Adebayo, Can I have a word with you? Mrs. Ogunlana called out. Curious, Yewande joined the group. She quickly learned that the school was organizing a meeting to address issues of child safety. The stories of Tunde's disappearance and Amina's brief ordeal had stirred the community into action. Parents were demanding changes, from stricter pickup protocols to better neighborhood awareness. We're asking parents to share their ideas and experiences, Mrs. Ogunlana explained. And since your family has recently gone through this, your perspective would be invaluable. Yuane hesitated. She wasn't used to speaking publicly, but the thought of preventing another family from experiencing what hers had endured made her nod. I'll be there, she promised. That evening, Yuande shared the news with Kunle. They want me to speak at the school meeting, she said, her voice tinged with nervousness. Kunle smiled. You should. You've been a voice of reason for us through this whole thing. The day of the meeting arrived quickly. The school hall was packed with parents, teachers, and community members. Yuande sat near the front, her palms sweating as she clutched the speech she had written the night before. When her name was called, she stood and walked to the podium. The room fell silent. Good evening, everyone, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. My name is Yewande Adebayo, and like many of you, I'm a parent. 2 weeks ago, my family experienced something that no parent ever wants to face. My son, Tunde, went missing. For hours, we didn't know where he was, or if we would ever see him again. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. It was a failure on our part. A painful reminder that our busy lives had taken priority over what truly matters. But what struck me most was the kindness of strangers and the strength of this community. Without their help, we might not have found Tunde. She continued, sharing practical suggestions for improving safety measures at the school and within the neighborhood. She emphasized the importance of communication, vigilance, and collaboration. By the time she finished, the room erupted in applause. As Yuande returned to her seat, Tunde, sitting beside Kunle in the audience, beamed with pride. You were amazing, Mum, he whispered. Thanks, sweetheart, Yuande replied, hugging him tightly. That night, as the family settled in for bed, Yuande and Kunle reflected on how much they had learned and grown. Their ordeal had been harrowing, but it had also brought them closer as a family and connected them to a stronger, more united community. Little did they know, the ripple effects of their experience were just beginning to unfold. The days following the school meeting brought a sense of calm and renewal to the Adebayo household. Yewande and Kunle had not only mended their strained relationship, but had also become more intentional about their family life. Tunde, once quiet and wary, seemed more confident and secure. The community, galvanized by the events surrounding Tunde's disappearance and Amina's brief ordeal, began implementing changes. The school introduced a new pickup policy, requiring parents to sign a log before collecting their children. A group of parents formed a neighborhood watch, ensuring that no child was left wandering the streets again. The Adebayo family's story had sparked something larger than they could have imagined. One sunny Saturday morning, as the family enjoyed breakfast on the veranda, a familiar figure approached their gate. It was Mama Bola, her tray of roasted corn balanced on her head and a wide smile on her face. Mama Bola, Tunde exclaimed, running to greet her. She set her tray down and enveloped him in a warm hug. Ah, my little Tunde, how are you, my dear? I'm fine, thank you for helping me that night, he said earnestly, his eyes bright with gratitude. Yewande and Kunle joined them, their expressions filled with appreciation. Mama Bola, you've been a blessing to our family. We can't thank you enough for what you did, Yewande said. I only did what anyone should do, Mama Bola replied modestly. But it warms my heart to see Tunde safe and happy. Kunle handed her an envelope. We wanted to give you this as a token of our gratitude. It's not much, but we hope it helps in some way. Mama Bola hesitated before accepting it, her eyes misty. Thank you. May God continue to bless your family. As she left, Tunde waved until she disappeared down the street. That evening, the family gathered in the living room, reminiscing about the whirlwind of events that had reshaped their lives. I've been thinking, Kunle said, breaking the comfortable silence. Maybe it's time we take that family trip we've been putting off for years. Yuande raised an eyebrow. Are you serious? Absolutely, Kunle said, smiling. After everything we've been through, we deserve it. And I want Tunde to know that family time is more important than anything else. Tunde's face lit up. Can we go to Obudu Mountain Resort? I heard it's really cool. Yuande laughed. Why not? Let's make it happen. For the first time in weeks, laughter filled the house, and the weight of their past worries seemed to lift. The Adebayo family's ordeal had not only strengthened their bond, but had also transformed their outlook on life. They had learned the value of prioritizing what truly mattered and the importance of leaning on their community in times of need. Yuande continued her involvement in the school and neighborhood initiatives, becoming a voice for safety and cooperation. Kunle, too, found balance in his work and family life, ensuring he was present for the moments that mattered most. As for Tunde, he carried the lessons of those harrowing hours with him, growing into a boy who understood the value of trust, kindness, and resilience. One evening, as the family sat under the stars in their backyard, Tunde spoke up. Mummy, Daddy, he said, even though what happened was scary, I'm glad it brought us closer. I think we're stronger now. Yuande and Kunle exchanged a look, their hearts swelling with pride. Yes, Tunde, Yuande said softly. We are stronger now. And no matter what, we'll always face things together as a family. The stars seemed to shine brighter that night, as if affirming their newfound unity. And for the first time in a long while, the Adebayo family felt whole, happy, and at peace.